I have personally watched a retiree open an IRS envelope at her kitchen table and start shaking. Not because she owed thousands, not because she cheated on her taxes, not because she did anything wrong on purpose. She owed $41 in penalties. $41. And it terrified her more than any bill she'd received in 20 years. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant. It meant the system she trusted, the one that had quietly taken care of her taxes for 40 years through paycheck withholding, had stopped working. And nobody told her. That is exactly why we're sitting down today. Right now, this week, thousands of older Americans are opening mail from the IRS and finding penalties they never saw coming. Some are confused, some are embarrassed. Almost all of them say the exact same sentence to me. Walter, I thought my taxes were already taken care of. Here's what's really going on. The rules around how retirement income gets taxed haven't dramatically changed, but the way you receive income absolutely has. And most people are still operating on assumptions that made perfect sense when they had one employer and one paycheck. Those assumptions stop working the day you retire. And here's the part that genuinely bothers me. Almost every one of these penalties was completely avoidable. You don't need to be wealthy to get hit by this. You don't need a six-figure investment account. You don't need to own a business or have a complicated estate. In most cases, all it takes is income arriving from the wrong source without enough tax withheld along the way. Stay with me because this affects people drawing Social Security, pension income, retirement account withdrawals, part-time wages, interest, dividends, even survivor benefits. It is far more common than most people realize, and it is rarely talked about until it's already a problem. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why these penalties happen, who's most exposed, the early warning signs that show up months before any letter arrives, and the simple, no-cost steps you can take this week to protect yourself. And stick around until the end because there's one phone call, completely free, that can prevent a very expensive surprise next April. My name is Walter Barron. I'm a state bar licensed estate attorney, and for more than 15 years, I've sat across the table from families navigating probate courts, county offices, and the kind of government paperwork that seems designed to confuse good people. I'm not here with theories. I've watched widows lose sleep over notices they didn't understand. I've untangled mistakes that a single 10-minute phone call could have prevented years earlier. What stays with me is always the same thing: how hard these folks worked for every dollar. They're not chasing loopholes. They just want to keep what they earned without a government letter ruining their week. That's why I make these videos. The rules keep shifting quietly in the background, and nobody sends a memo when something important changes. Now, I already know what some of you are thinking. Walter, I don't make much money. Surely this doesn't apply to me. Or, I already paid taxes my whole working life. I'm done with surprises. That reaction makes total sense. It's also exactly where people get caught off guard. Here's the biggest myth I hear, week after week, that IRS penalties only happen to wealthy retirees with big portfolios. That is simply not true. The IRS penalty system doesn't ask whether you have $1 million or $10,000 sitting in an account. It asks one question only: was enough tax paid throughout the year, not just by the time you filed? That's the entire ballgame, timing. Even when your total tax bill for the year is small, a penalty can still show up if the payments weren't made on the right schedule. It doesn't matter if you rent instead of own. It doesn't matter if your only income is a Social Security check and a modest pension. The issue was never wealth. The issue is timing, and almost nobody explains that to you before it becomes a problem. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. Many retirees accidentally create this exact problem simply by changing where their income comes from after they stop working. Let me walk you through it. When you had a regular job, your employer withheld taxes from every single paycheck automatically. You earned the income, the tax came out, and the system ran quietly in the background. You barely thought about it for decades. Then retirement arrives, and suddenly your income doesn't come from one place anymore. It comes from several. Maybe Social Security, maybe a pension, maybe withdrawals from a retirement account, a little consulting work on the side, interest from your savings, dividends from investments. Each one of those sources plays by its own withholding rules, and the automatic system you relied on for 40 years quietly stops being automatic. That is exactly where trouble begins. The IRS generally expects tax to be paid as income is earned or received, not all at once when you file. When not enough is withheld along the way, a penalty can appear even if you eventually pay your full tax bill in April. That detail genuinely shocks people. They assume that paying what you owe at filing time settles everything. Sometimes it does. Often, it doesn't. And here's the part that catches even careful people. Many retirement income sources don't automatically withhold enough tax unless you specifically request it. Social Security is a perfect example. Federal tax isn't automatically pulled from your benefit the way it was from your paycheck. You have to elect it. The same blind spot shows up with retirement account withdrawals. Someone takes money from a traditional IRA. The cash lands in the bank. Everything feels completely normal. Months later, they discover that withdrawal quietly increased their taxable income for the year and not nearly enough was set aside to cover it. And the dangerous part is that nothing feels wrong when it happens. There's no alarm, no flashing light, no phone call warning you. Life simply continues until tax season arrives and the numbers finally catch up. I want to tell you about a client I'll call Margaret. Margaret was a widow in her early 70s. Small house, simple lifestyle, careful with every single dollar, the kind of person who clipped coupons not out of necessity, but out of habit and pride. After her husband passed, she needed extra income for home repairs and rising medical costs. So she started taking larger withdrawals from her retirement account. Nobody sat her down and explained how those withdrawals would interact with her taxes. She assumed, reasonably, that it would just work itself out the way it always had during her working years. The first year, the impact was small, barely noticeable. The second year, it grew. By the third year, a thorough arrived showing taxes owed, plus penalties, plus interest. The dollar amount wasn't life-altering, but for Margaret, it felt enormous. Because every one of those dollars represented something specific. Groceries, prescriptions, the electric bill, a little breathing room. What hurt her most wasn't the money. It was the feeling that she'd done something wrong. She hadn't. She simply never received the information she needed at the moment she needed it. We reviewed everything together and adjusted the withholding on her future distributions. The problem stopped immediately. But she said something to me that I have never forgotten. Walter, if someone had told me this 3 years ago, I never would have been in this position. That sentence is the entire reason this channel exists. And that's exactly why, if you haven't already, I want you to hit subscribe right now while it's fresh in your mind. Because this isn't the only blind spot hiding in the retirement tax system. Every week on Walter Retires, I break down one of these quiet traps in plain English before it ever has the chance to cost you money. Margaret's story isn't rare, it's common. And the people who avoid it are almost always the people who heard about it before it happened to them, not after. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's keep going. Because there's another group of people this affects even more than Margaret, and you need to know if you're in it. Another group that gets caught off guard almost every time is retirees who begin required minimum distributions, what the IRS calls RMDs. In plain English, this is just government language for a mandatory withdrawal from certain retirement accounts once you reach a specified age. The government has let your money grow tax-deferred for decades, and now it wants its share collected. So the withdrawal becomes required, whether you need the cash that year or not. Most people focus entirely on the withdrawal itself, when it hits, how much it is. What they overlook is the tax impact riding along with it. The money arrives, it gets deposited, life moves on. But your taxable income for the year just went up. And if the withholding on that distribution is too low, the consequences don't show up until much later. Here's the distinction that catches people off guard every single time. The IRS isn't only looking at what you owe at the end of the year. It's also evaluating whether you paid appropriately throughout the year. That difference matters enormously, and it's the part nobody explains in the retirement brochures. Now, I'm not telling you that everyone watching this is headed for a penalty. Most retirees are perfectly fine. But in my experience, the people most exposed to this problem usually fall into a short list of categories. Listen closely, because you may recognize yourself or someone you love. People who recently retired. People who recently lost a spouse. People who started taking larger retirement account withdrawals. People who sold property. People who picked up part-time work later in life. People whose income increased unexpectedly. And people who simply haven't reviewed their withholding elections in years, sometimes decades. Think about that last one for a second. Decades. It's remarkable how many financial settings sit completely untouched while life changes dramatically around them. A spouse passes away, an account gets inherited, a pension begins, a distribution starts, and the withholding instructions from 15 years ago never get a second look until the tax result quietly changes. Here's another pattern I see constantly. A retiree has income from 3 or 4 different sources. Each one withholds a little tax. Individually, every source looks perfectly reasonable, but collectively, across all of them, it adds up to not enough. That's what makes this issue so sneaky. No single source ever looks like the problem. The shortfall only becomes visible once everything gets added together, and by then, months have already passed. Many seniors also believe Social Security itself can never create a tax concern. That's not always accurate. Depending on your overall income for the year, a portion of your Social Security benefit can become taxable. The exact calculation gets complicated, but the principle is simple, and I want you to remember it. Stop asking, is this individual check taxable? Start asking, how does this check affect my total income for the year? Those are two very different questions, and the second one is almost always the more important one. That single shift in thinking, asking about the whole picture instead of one piece at a time, is one of the most protective habits a retiree can build. Here's a mistake I see constantly. People wait until tax season to think about their taxes. That habit worked reasonably well when income came from a single employer with automatic withholding. It becomes far riskier once retirement income is arriving from multiple directions at once. The earlier a shortfall is spotted, the easier it is to fix. Increasing withholding mid-year is almost always simpler and far less stressful than dealing with penalties after the fact. And before you assume this sounds complicated, in most cases it genuinely isn't. It usually starts with one phone call, one review, one updated withholding form. That's the whole process. The problem was never complexity. The problem is awareness. Most people simply don't know they need to ask the question, and nobody calls to remind them. That's exactly why these penalties feel so unfair when they arrive. From the retiree's perspective, everything looked completely normal. Bills were paid, returns were filed, life continued exactly as it always had. Then a letter showed up. That letter is often the first warning instead of the last one, and that is completely backwards. The warning should always come before the problem, not after. I want to spend a moment specifically on widows and widowers because this group faces a unique version of this challenge. After losing a spouse, there are emotional decisions, legal decisions, financial decisions, and tax decisions all arriving at once, often within the same few weeks. People are grieving. Withholding percentages are understandably the last thing on anyone's mind. But tax status can change, income sources can change, filing status can change. The entire financial picture can shift almost overnight, even while everything else feels frozen in place. If that describes you, please don't assume your old tax settings still fit your new reality. Take the time to review them. You deserve that protection. You already have enough on your plate. And if you're an adult child helping an aging parent through this conversation matters just as much for them. Many families only discover a tax problem after the notice has already arrived. One quick review today can spare a great deal of stress next spring. Here's exactly what I'd do this week if I were sitting in your shoes. First, pull together a simple list of every income source you currently receive. Not next month, not at tax time, this week. Social Security, pensions, retirement account withdrawals, investment income, any work income. Second, contact the payer for each one and ask a single direct question. How much federal tax is currently being withheld from my payments? Write the answer down next to each source. Third, if anything seems unclear, ask whether the withholding can be adjusted and what form is required to do it. Fourth, reach out to a free taxpayer assistance program for seniors in your area, or speak with a qualified tax preparer before the end of the year, not while you're filing in April when your options have already narrowed. If you receive Social Security, you can contact the agency directly and ask about withholding elections if that's appropriate for your situation. And if you hold retirement accounts, call the institution managing them and ask whether your current withholding instructions still make sense given your actual withdrawal pattern. None of these steps cost much. Most cost absolutely nothing. But every one of them gives you the chance to catch a problem while there's still time to fix it quietly instead of discovering it in an envelope next spring. Remember, none of this is about handing the government extra money. It's about making sure the right amount is paid at the right time so you're never blindsided later. That's the entire goal here. Peace of mind, predictability, and control over your own finances. After decades of hard work, you've earned the right to know exactly where your money is going, and you deserve to keep every dollar that's rightfully yours. If today's conversation helped you, take 10 minutes this week to review your income sources using the checklist I just walked through. Then send this video to one person you care about who's over 65, a sibling, a neighbor, a friend from church, someone who might never come across this information otherwise. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment. New videos go up every week right here on Walter Retires, each one built to help you avoid one more costly surprise and make retirement just a little less confusing. Thank you for spending this time with me today. This video is general educational information only and is not personal, legal, tax, or financial advice. Tax rules vary by state, income, and individual circumstances. Always confirm your specific situation with the appropriate county office, your state SHIP office, the IRS, or a qualified professional before making financial or tax decisions.